We are live on Facebook and we are recording the session as well. Welcome everyone. So this is the flow for the session tonight. If you are new to my sessions, we kick it off with some intros and then we'll dive right into a presentation. Just so you know, and heads up, today's session is a pretty beefy topic. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to finding your ideal co-founder. So I might speak a bit quickly. So I do ask for your forgiveness at the start. If you miss anything, again, don't worry, you get the slides and you also get the recording. But the way I want to do this presentation is I like to really go through a lot of content to make sure that I cover all the bases. And then if you have any questions at any time, there's some time at the end for Q&A. I'll try to have some time in between if you have any questions. But if you are starting to notice anything, if you're starting to say, hey, you know, I have a question on this, make sure you write it down so you don't forget. And then we should be able to wrap up at 7:30 sharp. So a few housekeeping rules. I'd love to hear your insights and your experiences as well. The journey of finding a co-founder is different for everyone. So I'd love to build on those stories. If you've had things that you found work for you, if you've struggled in different ways, feel free to share your perspective as well. Other things that I like to do with my workshops is I like to try to create a safe and welcoming environment. So if you hear anyone coming off mute, and if English is not your first language, do bear with them for a bit. Otherwise, if you are hearing that people are not being direct, if they're beating around the bush, also do call them out, but be respectful while you do that as well. So let's kick it off with some community announcements. If you have anything that you want to share, any workshops, any upcoming events, like I mentioned, if you want to just pitch your business, if you're looking for a co-founder, this is your time. It's going to be quickest for you to just come off mute and share instead of typing. So anyone want to make any announcements? While we are waiting, I can make a few quick announcements. It is Vancouver Startup Week this week. So you can check it out at Vancouver Startup Week. It is an all virtual event this year. So if you're curious, there's a whole bunch of workshops. I actually just did one yesterday on sales and marketing strategy, but today there's a whole bunch and there's more coming up tomorrow as well. So it doesn't matter where you're from. If you want to tune in, it's all online, it's all through Hopin, and it's all free. So feel free to check out some of the events if you're interested. And there's an upcoming hackathon this weekend as well. I'll talk more about that later. Anyone else want to share anything? No? All right, shy crowd today. If you want, you can also type it out in the chat and I will read out your intros. Otherwise, I will move on. So just to give you some of my background, my name is Chin. I'm your host tonight. I am the founder of Classy Narwhal. I come from a background that is pretty rich in entrepreneurship. I spent the last 5 years working for a social venture incubator accelerator in town. And over that time, I've worked with close to about 400 or so entrepreneurs and companies. So I've seen all sorts of journeys when it comes to teams. I've seen people form teams around hackathons and competitions. I've seen teams break up over disputes around equity. I've seen people recruit and add to the team later on as well. So I hope to be able to share some of this experience with you throughout the session tonight. But I think I don't think I've seen everything yet. So if you have seen other things that are interesting, then definitely feel free to share your experience. Here are the key things that I aim to do with the workshop tonight. So we'll talk about the key role of a co-founder. We'll go into the process of how exactly to find a good co-founder. We'll talk about the traits of a good co-founder. We'll talk a bit about where to find them, you know, what platforms, what events, and then we'll wrap it up by talking about how to compensate them. So, curious from the crowd, how many of you are looking for a co-founder right now? And again, you can just type out in the chat. And if you are looking for a co-founder, what do you find challenging about a co-founder? What is the piece around the whole journey of finding a co-founder that you find the most difficult? Is it finding the right people? Is it pitching to them? Don't know where to start. Don't know either. Well, I think tonight's session should hopefully be able to go through a lot of content that will give you some good insight. So let's just jump right into it. So why a co-founder? I might be stating the obvious here, But I think a lot of you who are starting to think about looking for a co-founder usually start because there is a lack of a certain skill set. So you might say, I want to build a tech company, but maybe I need a tech co-founder because I'm not a tech person. Or maybe you're the tech person, but you don't have the business experience, right? Skill is only one piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of other great reasons to find a co-founder as well. So number one, having people to bounce ideas off, because sometimes having one perspective is not as rich. When you have other people in the room, you get to see ideas in different ways. You get to come up with different solutions. Obviously, sometimes you just don't have enough time or there's too much for you to do. And lastly, just having someone to work with, I find really, really works very well to help hold you accountable and to push you to do things. Because I find when you are an entrepreneur, you are your own boss. And sometimes being your own boss is a really nice thing, but at the same time, you might know that you are usually more productive when someone is holding you accountable. So having that co-founder does really help. Obviously, you can succeed as a solopreneur. Nothing wrong with that. I am a solopreneur myself, but it will be vastly more challenging. So if you can't find a co-founder, my first piece of advice before we dive into the session is think about how you can surround yourself with the right mentors and advisors so that even though you don't have a co-founder, you still have that same element of accountability, but you also still get the richness of diversity and experience, and you can also have other people lean in and support you as well. Welcome, Mitesh. We are just jumping in. Just so you know, the session is being recorded, so you can get the recording later as well. So the reason why teams and co-founders are so important is because I find that almost every business that I've worked with, the idea that they start on day one is very, very different from the idea that they bring to market and scale with. So I'd say ideas will evolve over time, but what really is the fundamental thing that keeps a business alive? It's the team, right? Even if you find that you can't raise capital from investors, even if you find that the market is not receptive, the market is changing and they don't really like your idea, at the end of the day, it's all about the team that decides whether a business continues or not. The great saying is, businesses don't fail, founders get a job, right? So at the end of the day, it's all about finding the right people who are passionate about the same mission that you have, and that will really help you build a good team. The other things to think about is when you have a good team as well, it really helps you get through that trough of sorrow. Because when you run a startup, and I speak from experience, the first few months are really exciting because you're doing something brand new, you're learning a lot of new things. But once you start to get into the rhythm of things, as you launch, as you put yourself out there, as you try to get customers, it starts to get difficult really, really quickly because you notice that, everything that you're doing, you're struggling to get traction. You can't seem to get the right amount of people or the right customers in front of you. So that's where having that team helps give you that emotional support as well. And it really helps push and challenge you to grow and reach for higher goals as well. So solo versus more, the obvious things here is, especially if you're thinking about fundraising, if you're going out there and if you're thinking about reaching to investors to raise capital for your business, investors will never invest in a solo founder. That being said, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have co-founders to raise capital, but you will have to have a team. So I'm just using the word team here because if anything happens to you and if you try to raise an investment from an investor, let's say if God forbid you catch COVID or if you get hit by a bus, their investment basically goes poof, right? So if you have a team, then they know that the business will at least still continue. So it de-risks the opportunity for them. The other thing is when it comes to stats, balanced teams actually perform much better. I think the number is balanced teams with one technical co-founder and one business founder raise at least 30% more funding. They have usually about two and a half times more user growth. If you are in a team where it's mostly all business, then I find that at least with business teams, you are usually better set out rather than a pure technical team. So I've seen teams where it's just all technical co-founders, and usually those teams tend to struggle a lot at the start. That being said, there are many ways to kind of work your team around diversity, so I'll talk about those in a bit. So let's get into why or how to find a co-founder. When it comes to finding a co-founder, when it comes to numbers, I'd say the ideal number is about 2 to 3. I'd say 3 is the best. Anything more than 3, you usually get into a lot of politics. You get a lot of issues around like equity. People start to struggle over who's more powerful, who has more decision. There's a lot of drama that comes into play then. So your goal is about 2 to 3, and that's a good number because ideally that's enough for you to have distributed workload. You trust people, you trust each other. There's some diversity in skills. There's some specialization in roles. So you're not having too much overlap as well. The challenge that I find with most entrepreneurs when they start, might be you as well, is when you go out and look for a co-founder, you go out and you say, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder. And what's the problem with that? It's exactly like this. It's like when you go out and you try to go on a date, but you say, hey, I am looking for a wife and I want to have 2 kids and a dog, right? So you're coming across too strong when you say you're looking for a co-founder. So this is, if you walk away with anything tonight, I want you to walk away with this. When you go out and look for a co-founder, don't look for a co-founder. Your goal is to look for a team member. So when you start off too strong, it leads to a lot of mismanaged expectations, and then you end up with co-founder breakups, right? Co-founder breakups happen for a lot of reasons. I've seen many co-founder breakups in my time, and usually some of the main reasons include when you have working styles or working ethics that don't match. You rush into the relationship, and then sometimes, let's say if you're the person and you are the type that is very flexible, you might say, oh, you know what, you can work anytime, right? But you yourself, you're a hustler. You like to work all day, every day, and you bring on board someone who is more of a 9 to 5 person, and maybe they have a family, maybe they can only work on weekdays. And you, even though you say you're okay with them, if your work ethics don't match, you will eventually feel that someone is not pulling enough weight. You'll feel that, oh, you're putting in more effort than they are, and you'll feel that your equity should be worth more than theirs. So then it creates a lot of friction as well. The opposite is true as well. If you are trying to build a lifestyle company and you just want to work 9 to 5, and you bring on board a co-founder that's working all day, every day, then they will feel uncomfortable as well. So that's one big reason that I commonly see a lot of breakups happen. The other big one is difference in values and vision. So obviously, in my opinion, this is the most important thing when it comes to finding the right co-founder. You need to bring on board people who believe not only in your product, because your product will evolve, but primarily you want to bring on board people who are passionate about your vision for how you want to change the world and share the same values. Values are so important because values are the how to your why. So what happens there is if you have people who believe in your mission, but they have different values, they might try to execute in ways that you believe do not resonate with you. So for example, you might say, oh, we are all about trying to get user growth. So growth is one of your key values. And if the other person doesn't share the same values, the way they will try to grow the company might be very different from the way that you would envision growing the company. So it's very important to align on vision and values. Sometimes I see people rushing into co-founder relationships with their friends or with their spouses. Not to say that that can't be done, but it can become a bit challenging because sometimes when you go into a co-founder relationship with someone that you know, especially people that you're close with, then it becomes difficult for you to address the elephant in the room, because sometimes you're too worried about offending the other party. So just be mindful about what type of relationship and who you know when you're going to this type of co-founder relationships. Equity is another big reason why I see a lot of co-founders break up. The equity piece, and I'll talk more about it when we talk about how to compensate. I usually find that I would say that there are many ways to split equity, and there is no perfect way to split equity. So I'll talk about how to do that in a second. But the goal when you think about equity is you want to try to be as fair as possible, because if anyone feels at any point in the relationship, in the business, where someone is not pulling the weight or not getting the right amount of compensation, the other person will quickly lose motivation and they will tend to try to leave the company, or they will become an inactive co-founder, which also is dangerous, because then you have someone who owns part of your company but isn't doing any work as well. So even if you don't end up breaking up with your co-founder, just having all these issues really slows down the business, because you end up spending more time on the relationship rather than on your products and customers. So you want to make sure that you are not being distracted by these kind of things, because it will slow down decision-making process. It will demotivate your whole team as well. So how do you do it then? If you're not going out and trying to find a co-founder, the key word there is when you're going to try to find a team member, your goal is to not start off too strong. So don't come across as saying, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder. So don't try too hard. what I encourage is to do due diligence. What you want to do is you want to try to bring people on board and get to know them before you make them a co-founder, because it's much easier for you to promote them down the road rather than it is to demote them, right? So what you can do is you can start by bringing on board someone as, you know, a contractor, and then eventually making them a part-time worker or full-time worker, and then eventually making them a, you know, early employee that has some equity, and then eventually making them a co-founder as well. So it's much better to elevate someone rather than start off, you know, have someone join, become a co-founder, and then you realize 2 years later, this person is not really worth that co-founder title, and you try to demote them, and, you know, you have that really tricky conversation of how to put them away from the title of being a co-founder. So just to give you the other perspective, when someone is hearing you say, hey, will you join my team as a co-founder? There's a lot of expectation around the word co-founder. They're thinking, does it mean I need to quit my job? Does it mean I have to be full-time in your business? Does it mean I need to be responsible for this business? Do I need to actually have all my opinions heard? And I will feel like you're expecting that I should know everything that is related to my field of domain, right? So if you're bringing me on board as a CTO, for example, maybe I don't have that CTO experience. So maybe I'm just a developer, and I have to feel like, oh, I need to be a CTO, I need to think about strategy for tech, sometimes it's a lot of pressure, right? So try to get to know them first. When you are doing due diligence, the key things that you're looking out for is passion and vision. Are they excited about your business? That is the number one thing. If they're not excited, even if they're the most skilled person, it doesn't matter. One thing to be very careful about with passion is don't confuse passion with people who are hungry for opportunity. So what I typically see is it's very exciting to go into a startup. It's very exciting to do something where there's a potential of you know, scaling the business, raising capital. So a lot of people get overly excited by these opportunities, and they think like, oh, I'm going to get rich really quickly, and then they realize that, oh, it's a lot harder than I thought, and it's, you know, maybe not going to be as profitable as I thought at the start. So passion is really the keyword here. If you find someone who's passionate about your vision, they will stay around and they will be able to work through all those trials. If they're not passionate about your vision or your mission, then you really are in a risky place because they're only there for the money. The second thing to look for is, after you think about passion and vision, skills and experience, obviously, right? So you're trying to see, do they actually match up to their resume? Can they actually do a good job? And then what you're trying to do is, are they capable of adapting and evolving? Because as a startup, you're going to notice that roles will change quite often. You will realize that, you know, maybe 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, you will scale very, very quickly. And that's also why it's nice to be in a startup, because sometimes you can very quickly elevate and be promoted as well. But at the same time, because the organization is evolving so quickly, you might very quickly notice that 1 month you're managing a team of 2 people, the next month you might have a team of 5, and then the month after that you might have a team of 20, who knows? So I'm not saying that every company scales at that speed, but because the roles are changing all the time, you need adaptable leaders who are able to move and adjust based on that. And then the last thing you look for when you go through due diligence is just styles and habits. These are the kind of things that are really difficult to tease out in an interview. So what I mean by that is, like, you know, like we talked about work ethic, we talked about, you know, style of communication. So how do you get along with these people? Because at the end of the day, if they're passionate, if they share the same values and vision with you, but if they don't share the same styles and habits, you might not get along very well together as well. So in a real sense, I really believe that the word co-founder really comes up from the place where if people come up with the idea together, those are what I call real co-founders. It usually happens in competitions and hackathons where people say, hey, here's my idea, or here's this problem I want to solve. And then the whole team comes together and they form a solution out of that together. That's what I call a real co-founding team. Otherwise, if you are a founder and you say, hey, I want to find a co-founder, you are really actually looking for a team member, not a co-founder. As you bring on board people and you start to think about compensation, my recommendation is to focus less on equity. The reason why I recommend trying to defer this conversation as much as possible is you want to sit down with the team and make sure that everybody understands that there's no point on fighting over something that doesn't exist yet. Your goal right now is just to focus on validating the market, getting your initial customers, and building a product. Once you get into that, then you can talk about equity. So if you are finding that you need to bring up the equity conversation early on, then there is probably a problem with the people that you're bringing on board in the team. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of teams that I see tend to start talking about equity too soon. They usually bring up equity because they lack trust, and they feel like they don't trust the people that they're working with. Therefore, they are using equity to manage trust. That's not a good thing to do. If you have to use equity to manage trust, there is a fundamental issue of trust in the team. You're not going to work well. I guarantee you that. I've seen many teams try to do it and try to manage trust based on equity, and they end up breaking up over time. So if you trust people and everyone mutually respects each other and they know that everyone's not trying to shortchange each other and everyone's trying to be as fair as possible, then hopefully everyone will come out happy at the other end, because there's, like I mentioned, there's no perfect way to split equity. So at least they know that the intention is as pure as possible. Oops. So otherwise, really the whole conversation now is you're trying to bring on board a new team member as opposed to co-founder. When I say hire as well, when I say hiring an early team member, I want you to remember that hiring doesn't mean that you need to pay them salary. Because I know a lot of entrepreneurs come up to me and say, Chin, you want me to find a team member, but I haven't launched yet. I don't have any revenue. I can't pay people, right? It doesn't mean that you have to pay with monetary. You can hire someone and actually give them equity as well. So there are ways, we will talk about that, but you don't have to make someone a co-founder in order to give them equity. So one example here is BrightKit. BrightKit was acquired by Hootsuite. And when Richard was working with Spring, Richard was actually looking for a CTO at the time. He was the CEO. And he was interviewing a whole bunch of developers. And we really knew that Richard, although he said he was looking for CTO, and he was thinking like, in the long term, I want to have someone who is technical, who can give me strategic advice. We knew that right now he just really needed a lead developer. So we encouraged him to post a job posting, and he started by actually recruiting a lead developer. And Chris was interviewing, and in the interview, Chris actually shared with us after the interview that he actually really wanted to bring Chris on board as a CTO. He was very tempted to use that word and talk about being a co-founder, but he just stuck to hiring Chris as a lead developer. And after that, Chris was actually promoted to becoming a CTO after working with BrightKit for about 6 months. And what was interesting is, when we spoke to Chris about the experience and kind of getting his perspective after the fact, he was sharing that, yes, he was actually very happy that this was the route that was taken, because he felt it would have been too much pressure. If he was brought on board as a CTO at the start, he would have probably declined. He would probably felt that he wasn't qualified to be a CTO, right? So that's why I say, it's very important to start with a team member, and then you can elevate them later. So now that we know that we're looking for a team member instead of co-founder, what makes a good team member? Here's where you really want to start. And I encourage you to spend some time. We'll take about 2 minutes to do this exercise. Think about, as you're thinking, I need a co-founder, why exactly do you want that co-founder? What do you want to achieve with the company? What kind of culture are you trying to build? What skills do you need? What level of experience is immediately necessary right now? So I want you to take some time, just reflect on this, and hopefully it'll give you some insight on what's a good early role or title to put into your job description. All right. I won't have you share this, but we can move on. So as you are thinking now that you probably don't actually need a co-founder, you need a team member. The first starting point is I encourage you to start by following the why. So focus on alignment on vision and values, like I mentioned before. Uh, when you start to find someone who shares the same values with you, it becomes a lot easier for you to make right business decisions as well. Because a lot of people, when they're making decisions, when it comes to deciding, should we take on this customer or should we include this feature in our product, a lot of us don't realize that decision making starts from pros and cons for a lot of people. So for you, what is a pro, what's a benefit might actually be a con for someone else. Or what you might weigh as a pro might be different weighting from someone else as well. So someone might value certain things more than others. And it really all stems from values. So if you care a lot about, let's say, security, you care a lot about transparency, then if you bring about someone who doesn't care about the same values, the type of business decisions that you will run into, you'll find a lot of conflict, because sometimes you might feel that, oh, we need to be as transparent as possible with our customers. We need to share with them how exactly we do things. And maybe someone else doesn't see eye to eye on those kind of things. So when you bring on board people who share the same vision and values, decision-making becomes a lot smoother. And this is where you actually find that you build the best teams, because as you find that people share the same values, you want to get to that sweet spot where there is enough diversity, where people believe in the same mission, but they are open-ended and they care about solving the problems in different ways. So we'll talk about diversity over here. So diversity here, usually winning teams are moderate in diversity of opinion. You don't want groupthink as well. You don't want people to all share the same way of doing things. You want high diversity of expertise, but you want low diversity in power. You don't want someone to feel like they are the boss, or you don't want people who feel like you are the boss either, right? So when you have this moderate diversity in opinion, at the same time, while sharing the same vision and values, then this really creates a special place where you have teams that are amazing. They're willing to be creative. They're willing to share different ideas, and all the ideas, they know that they have the best interest of the company in mind. So when you're going out and you're doing this, especially at the start, my encouragement is the key people to look for, and what it looks like in the marketplace is these are what we call T-shaped thinkers. The T-shaped thinkers are basically, T represents the different verticals or different area of expertise. And then the bottom part of the T is the depth of expertise. So you want someone who knows a lot of different areas, but is an expert at one specific area. So that type of person is really a good addition to your team at the start. As you think about expertise here includes all kinds of things like skills, roles, experiences, responsibilities, styles, personality as well. So diversity there is a good thing, but you don't want diversity on values and mission and vision. Everything else, the more diversity, the better. The great way of thinking of diversity is there's a team here in Vancouver, and they were talking about how they have, I think, 65% women in their workforce. They don't brag about it, but what's interesting is they have never emphasized diversity in their hiring and recruitment process. But the reason why they've been able to build such a diverse team is when they are interviewing, they're actually looking for cognitive diversity. And the reason why this is great is because I find a lot of companies very superficially focus on D&I. They talk about diversity and inclusion. But at the end of the day, real natural diversity will come if you focus on cognitive diversity. You don't want to just like say, hey, I need X many females, or I need X many blacks or Native Americans or people of color in my company. All of those are very superficial measures that actually show you that you actually have diversity. If you look for cognitive diversity, you will naturally get all these kind of more superficial values of diversity. So as you think about diversity, another great example is the reason why it's so important to have people who think differently is there's this ketchup example. So in HR, they talk about this ketchup example, and basically it goes like this. In North America, most of us tend to store our ketchup in the fridge. But if you look at Europe, ketchup is typically stored in the cabinet, in the cooking cabinet. So when you run out of ketchup, if you are from North America, you will typically default to an alternative, which is ketchup and mayonnaise. 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 So if you run out of ketchup, you go for mayonnaise, right? Or mustard. If you're in Europe, if you run out of ketchup, then your alternative is vinegar or Tabasco. And basically you're seeing there that these are both valid alternatives, but people who come from different backgrounds and have a different perspective on life, they will tend to default to different alternatives. So that's why you want to bring on board people who have diversity, think differently, because then they will solve problems in very different ways. So, I kind of illustrated that in the example. People see an apple and they think about different things. So now the other question then I get is, if you are not bringing on board someone as a co-founder, the challenge when you bring on board a hire or even a contractor is that sometimes if you bring on board a contractor, they will feel like you're not as vested in their success. So what I usually think about in this way is, yes, that is true. If you are hiring someone, they know that you are invested in them and they will produce better work. If you are bringing on board a contractor, usually they're not as excited. But I think what you want to do is when you start with a contractor, it's mostly to test to ensure that the skill level is there. Once you find that a contractor is a good fit, then you don't want to waste any time. You want to quickly move them into a hire, if at all possible. So don't spend too long in that dating phase trying to have someone as a contractor, because they might lose motivation really quickly. And contractors typically take on multiple products, so they won't be very loyal to your company as well. Key practices around hiring. When you're thinking about hiring, be patient. I see a lot of people rush into it. Same as when you're trying to find a co-founder, they rush into that relationship. When you are trying to hire, don't be desperate, because there is a very high cost to having to rehire or retrain someone. So hire slow, but you want to fire as quickly as possible, right? When you are firing, like if someone's not a good fit, don't get into too much process. So what you want to do is, don't let politics get in your way. Document all the process. Try as much as you can to have a paper trail. I've seen and I've worked in companies where it's very difficult to fire people, because sometimes you need to show paperwork, you need to show that you've been coaching them, that you've been bringing up the issue with them, because you can't fire them without just cause. So make sure that every conversation you have, you're actually documenting all of it, if at all possible, and don't be afraid to actually make that hard decision to fire them if they're not a good fit. Another thing I see with a lot of co-founders is when they're thinking of hiring, when they're thinking of a team, they tend to think about hiring people that they can manage. Hiring people that you can manage is not a good thing, because you're ending up in a situation where you're hiring B and C players, right? If you're an A person, you're hiring B and C, and then if they are B and C, they will hire people that they can manage. So they're hiring C and Ds. Eventually, you'll get into an organization where you have all Z players facing your customers, right? So your goal is you want to make sure that you're hiring the best people. Ideally, hire people that are smarter and more skilled than you are, who have those skills in different areas that you don't have those skills in. And my last piece of advice when it comes to hiring is, if you have to hire, I recommend that you focus on, don't over celebrate being a unicorn. I find a lot of early entrepreneurs and startups tend to think like, oh, I'm a startup, I have to raise capital, I have to scale. Now that I've raised capital, I have to grow my team. And they get they get so attracted by that shine of being a unicorn. One great entrepreneur that I work with mentioned, it's much better to be a cockroach rather than being a unicorn, because the market will change very quickly. And if you are a cockroach, you can survive. If you're a unicorn, if you hire people, you have a high burn rate, you need to pay salaries, and those are the companies that burn out really quickly as well. So be as resilient as you can, survive as long as possible, and then when you are ready to scale, then you can start to hire. So the most important thing right now, especially if you are a pre-launch company, is focusing on what needs to be done before launch and right after launch. And then the next thing is, once you know what those tasks are, you can think about what skills to hire for. Then you want to start thinking about company culture right now. The reason why that's really important is because the first 50 people in your company will set the culture for you, like it or not. So if you have not decided to sit down on day one to think about company culture, you will be or build a company culture that might be toxic, and it's very, very difficult to change company culture after you have more than 50 employees. So start now, be as conscious and mindful about culture as you can. And then after that, you're also thinking about, as you start to bring on people and hire people, you just want to make sure that you have the right cash flow to support all the team members as well. So just make sure you have the right capital coming in, you have revenue, or you have investment versus what you have to pay, right? What's on payroll. screening candidates, as you are interviewing people, as you start to hire team members, here are some recommendations. So number one, be transparent about your problems and challenges. This is one of my favorite things to do in an interview. I actually tell people like, here's what we're facing. Here are some of our problems. How might you solve that problem? Or you can actually have a theoretical problem that you come up with. When you do that, it really helps you see how they solve problems, because it brings them out of themselves. Instead of focusing on their achievements, they're actually focusing on critical thinking. They're actually thinking about how they would solve it, right? So that actually helps you assess their skills. You're also looking for work ethic, like I mentioned. How does it manifest? You want to see, what's their life? How have they been working so far? Because some people will say, yeah, you know what? If you are a company that works all day, every day, I'm willing to do that. But at the end of the day, if that's their background, if that's not their background, then they will eventually get burned out as well. You want to know how well you talk about awkward topics as well. You want to feel that you're working with someone who respects you enough, that is okay with being confrontational, but at the same time, there's mutual respect. So they're not condescending. They are willing to bring things up without beating around the bush, but they're also being respectful with how they bring things up as well. So when you interview people, these are the two main types of questions you can ask. One is what we call a behavioral interview question. One is what we call a situational interview question. So situational interviews would be, what would you do if, or how would you solve this problem? These type of questions are good for assessing skill, assessing knowledge, but situational questions are not very good at assessing actual behavior. And the reason why I say that is because if someone says like, if you ask them, what would you do if you run into a challenge with your team member? Everyone can give a very positive sounding answer. So situational questions, in my opinion, are best asked for problem solving and testing critical thinking. So you want to ask them like, how would you deal with this if this app broke down, or if this feature broke down? Or you might say, if someone is in sales, how would you deal with a customer who's rejecting you? Your goal there is really to test their understanding and their skills. But people will tend to bullshit their way through those answers. So behavioral questions will tell you a bit more about what they've actually done. So it might sound like, what happened? Tell me about the last time this happened. What do you actually do? So the framework that you can use here for an interview, and if you're in a situation where maybe down the road you decide to get a job instead of run a startup, this is what HR managers are looking for. This is what recruiters are using. It's called the STAR framework. What the STAR stands for is they're looking to hear in your responses, number one, what is the situation? Number two, what was the task that you were responsible for? Number three, what is the action? And number four, what is the result? So they want to know what's the context, what were your responsibilities, what do you do, not what would you do, result, so actually what happened, and then what do you learn coming out of it? That's an extra bonus. So if you're interviewing people, my recommendation is try to bring people out of that formal setting. Some people, I've known very amazing people that really shut down in those interview settings because they just get so intimidated. So bring them out of the setting. I love to interview people when I go for a walk, right? You can try other things as well. You can go out for a meal. But at the end of the day, if you can make them comfortable, they can really be authentic in the way that they respond. And this is what you're listening for. Just really be careful about the third one here. What did you do, not what would you do? A lot of people who try to avoid this question will talk about what they would do. And what they would do is not necessarily what is really indicative, because past behavior is really the best predictor of future behavior. So if you know what they actually did, then it really shows you, what kind of person they are. Maybe I'll take a quick pause here. I'm kind of running through the slides because there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Any questions so far about how to interview people, how to screen people, what to look for? Again, probably fastest if you just come off mute.
Yeah, one question I have, all my past co-founders have been people I've known from past jobs or professional people I've worked with in the past. So where do you meet co-founders that you haven't met before? I mean, that's a question I have. And because you'll be working with this person for the next 3 to 5 years in a very intense environment. So what is a good place to go?
I will jump into that later because I'm actually on the slide where I'm going to talk about it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. Other questions? No? If no other questions, should I move on? I'm just going to quickly check on Facebook if there are any questions. Nope. Great. So yes, where to find them? So to answer your question, when it comes to real co-founders in the essence, my best place and my favorite place is really to go out to hackathons and pitch events. The reason why it's exciting is because I find a lot of people go to pitch events to try to find investors. That's not the right place. Investors are usually there just shopping around. They're not serious about investing, but pitch events are actually great for finding co-founders. Because when you're going there, if you do a good job sharing your vision, not just your idea, not just your tech, your solution, but really focusing on like why you're doing what you do, that really helps you attract the right people. So starting with hackathons, pitch events. Hackathons are great because you're actually forming a team together and then you're actually coming up with a solution together. So people feel a bit more vested in the company. They feel a bit more like they actually had a say in the decision-making process and it's not just your business that they're working on. So hackathons are my #1 recommendation. If you're not familiar with a hackathon or what it is, basically it's a startup competition where usually it happens over 3 days. The first day, they pitch the idea, they form a team, and then in the second day, they spend some time developing, designing, and validating the idea. So they'll go out, they'll interview customers, they'll try to do some sales. And then on the third day, there's some pitching to the judges and there's some prizes at the end. So startup weekend is a big one. So that's the first place. The other things that you do when you are in a hackathon, so even if your idea is not selected, one great way to maximize the value out of a hackathon is to, if you see someone that you really like and you really want to work with, go join their team. When you join their team, you get to do due diligence with them. You get to really see their behavior, their skills, how they work under pressure, and this really gives you a good sense if they're going to become a good team member in the future as well. And at the end of the day, if you win, even better, if your team wins, then there is some motivation for the people to continue on with the project beyond the event, right? The second best thing is, like Ritesh mentioned, your own network. So from the people that you know, when you tap into your own network, one good way that I like to try to do this is, I don't generally like to just go directly after people that I know. I like to put feelers out there into my network to see who is sincerely interested instead of me actually approaching people and poaching them. The reason why I do it that way is because when you approach people that you know, you're like, hey, I need a tech person. You know, John's a great tech guy or Amy's a great tech girl. If you are approaching them that way, you're primarily recruiting based on skill, not based on value and not based on vision. So one way I've seen a lot of companies actually recruit is Nada, which is a zero-waste grocery store in Vancouver. She started by actually creating a community group on Facebook. And that was actually how their company started. It was a community group called Zero Waste Vancouver. It's all about people who care about the zero waste lifestyle. And starting from the community group, she eventually started her pop-up shops, and then she eventually opened up a retail location. And she actually found that the Facebook group, that was the best place for her to recruit volunteers. And one of her COOs started as a volunteer. So her COO, her operations person, was an early volunteer for Nada. And I think she was volunteering for Nada for about 2 years before Brianne actually made her a COO. So that's one great way of doing it. I've seen many other examples where they do and recruit from either volunteers or even customers are a good place to recruit from. So that's kind of your network piece. If you can't find from network, you can solicit referrals as well. So what I like to do, for those of you who are on my mailing list, if you've received any of my advisory emails, that's one of the things that I do. So I send out an email once a month and it goes out to everyone who's connected to me, who's willing to continue to receive those emails. And sometimes I make an ask over there. So you might say, hey, I'm looking for an advisor. I'm looking for someone who can help with this topic, or I'm looking to recruit a team member on this topic if you're ready for that. When you put that ask there, then people can start to refer people. And usually, depending on the type of person you are, you will surround yourself with people who share the same values as you. And hopefully they will also share a network of other people who share similar values as well. So referrals are a pretty good place to start. If you really can't tap into your own network, then you start to go out to public groups. Public groups, if you're going to, let's say, LinkedIn groups, business groups, meetup groups, my recommendation there is not to focus on skill-based groups. So for example, there's a group here in Vancouver called Hackers Nest. And they're basically a group of developers that just come together, socialize, drink, have fun. Those kind of groups, not the best place to recruit a developer because yes, there are a lot of developers in those groups and meetings, but none of them might really care about your business idea. Instead, what I recommend is going after meetup groups where it's really about the topic of interest that your business is about. So let's say if you care about social justice, there might be groups out there that are, centered around social justice. If you care about the environment, maybe there are groups around there that focus on that, right? If you can't find a group, then you can be like Brianne, you can create your own group. So my recommendation there is try to find a cause that your business is about, some sort of mission. If there is a greater mission that people can align themselves with, that is just more than the company, then this is where you really have a great business that your customers will really become loyal to you because they know that it's not just about you selling them product. It's about you trying to do something that's bigger than themselves. Another example would be, I have a friend who runs this company called Priopta. And basically, he has this group called the Embodied Carbon Group. So that's a group where they meet up every month and they meet up in Seattle, they meet up in Vancouver, and they have conversations around how to build greener buildings. So that's a good place for him to start recruiting if he needs to, right? Instead of joining, let's say, an AI or machine learning group where he's trying to find a developer. So if he posts in an Embodied Carbon group and says, hey, I'm looking for a developer, if someone says, hey, you know what, I'm super passionate about this topic and I happen to be the developer, that person's going to be a much better early team member, even if that person doesn't have all the skills. Because if they share the same passion that you do, they will be willing to pick up the skills as necessary. And usually it's quite easy to filter for skills as well. So MuseFind, this is actually one of the companies we work with. MuseFind, they started in a startup weekend. So I actually was in the same startup weekend pitching my idea back in 2014. And I actually remember when Jennifer pitched her idea, I thought it was a stupid idea, but she ended up starting a company. So back in the days, 2014, that was when influencer wasn't even a word. And she was saying, hey, we want to help brands connect with those bloggers out there and those Instagrammers that are having a huge amount of followers. So that's where she pitched. She actually found her team member. The first team member was Andre, the guy in red. And then they ended up growing their team. So they started as a team of 3 people. They started with a simple landing page. They started doing some sales. And eventually, when they started to approach investors, one of the challenges that Jennifer had was a lot of investors were saying like, hey, we don't want to invest in you because you don't actually have co-founders yet. And Jennifer actually was able to find that sweet spot. And the keyword here is what she said to the investors is, I don't have direct co-founders right now, but these people are willing to join my team if I can close this round of funding by this date. So that gives investors the confidence that you will have a team, and it de-risks the opportunity for them because they know, if anything happens to you, their money is not going to go poof, that there's still people around, right? So that's what she did with the investors. And then when she raised a round of funding, she was able to bring on board Steven, who was their CTO. So Steven is this guy over here right beside the beer machine. And what was funny with Steven is when Steven joined the team, he was actually not allowed to write any code for 3 months. All he did was he shadowed Jennifer to see how she manually did the process of finding the right influencers for the right companies. And then he basically went out and automated that. So that's the best kind of automation because then you know that the tech you're building is actually amplifying something that already works rather than going out to build tech for the sake of building tech and then realizing that, oh, maybe this feature doesn't work. This is not necessary. This is not needed, right? So that's their journey and their story. Nada, I talked about it. They started out doing those pop-up shops. Now they have a grocery store. And they're making close to, I think, 3 million in revenue a year now. But yeah, she started by hiring from her volunteers, and she's hired quite a few volunteers over her time as well. So maybe I want to give some time for the room. I'd love to have all of you come off mute to quickly share, yourself, your name, what's your mission, your company, and everyone else who is listening. I want you to think about, if you know someone else who might be interested in the business, who might be able to add some value, or even if the person is saying like, hey, I'm looking for a developer, I'm looking for a salesperson. If you know someone, think about who you could introduce them to, or on the other hand, also pay attention to how they're pitching. See if you can help them rephrase certain things so that they do a better pitch as well. So does anyone want to kick us off and come off mute and just introduce yourself? I know Sajung and Sarah, you mentioned you're looking for a co-founder. Do you want to try?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Sajung. I'm looking for the CEO for the technical product already made, MVP made for the cryptocurrency based stock trading system.
Cool. Out of curiosity, is there a specific type of role or person that you're looking for?
Yeah, CEO.
CEO. Okay, so you're a tech person.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So we built the, all the international stuff could be transferred here using the crypto, like NASDAQ, Kosdaq, Japan or whatever.
Cool. All right. Anyone else want to go?
Hi, I'm Shanti.
Hi, Shanti.
Hi, and I'm just looking to see if I can find anybody who's interested in starting a design consultancy in India with me. So by design, I'm talking more of product design in the pharmaceutical industry or any kind of healthcare industry. Not something that's already halfway through, like the way it comes to consulting projects now. So I came to this meeting to have an idea about how to go about it, because I'm not the business person, I'm just a scientific person.
Yeah, great, thanks for sharing. Anyone else? So quickly, Shanti, are you looking for more of a person on the business side of things or more on the design side of things?
Business.
Business.
Someone who has very good networking skills. Basically, someone who can complement my skills while sharing the same ethics.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing to find. I've worked with many people.
Yeah.
And even though you may have great ideas, they all go to naught if you're not in sync.
Yeah, true.
So.
Anyone else want to share? Just a quick comment, since I heard both of your pitches. One way you can possibly find the right person without explicitly saying that, hey, I'm looking for a CEO, is by actually talking about some of your weaknesses. So sometimes just being vulnerable and saying, hey, you know what, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm building, these are the challenges that I have, this is where I'm struggling, and I'm looking for someone who can help me with this. That usually is a good way for people to actually identify themselves and see, hey, you know what, I think I can solve that problem, I think I can help with that. The business side of things, and I think to keep in mind as well, is I would say, if anything, people who are in a sales related role, CEO, business developers, usually it's very, very important for them to really believe in your company. So not just your product, because like I mentioned before, your product will evolve, but these are the key folks that if they don't believe in your company, then it's going to be really, really challenging for them to be a good team member, because eventually they might even wrestle some control away from you, especially if you're more on the technical side of things. Because I'm a technical person as well myself. I do a lot of sales training and coaching, but I actually prefer delivering. I prefer teaching. I prefer working with people as opposed to like going out, doing sales, evolving my product. So that's the kind of person I am. And we as technical people like to be more behind the scenes. So if you work with someone who is more on the business side of things and they're really outspoken, they usually have a lot of opinions on how to evolve the product. So it's very important for you to make sure that they share the same vision, share the same values as you do. Cool. So maybe I'll quickly talk about just one hackathon I have coming up on this weekend, and then I can go into compensation. So I'm actually running a hackathon this weekend called the Do Good Business Challenge. It's more to spur retail innovation, especially right now with a lot of small businesses and how they're struggling in COVID. So if anyone has any ideas related to retail that might benefit any businesses that are either trying to move towards e-commerce or have some sort of physical space, like co-working spaces, we have WeWork participating. We have YVR Prep, which is a commissary kitchen. We have a recycling company. We have a vending machine company. So any kind of business that is physical in location, if you have ideas that might benefit them, then this is a great place for you to pitch your ideas, find team members, and kind of validate and get your early customers as well. But let's move on and talk about how to compensate them. So compensation, I mentioned, even if you don't have money, there's a lot of ways to compensate someone. So money is, of course, one of the things. Equity, we've talked about. The other thing to think about is commission or revenue share. I love to use the word revenue share rather than commission, because when you are bringing on board someone, if you say, I can't pay you, I can give you commission, it doesn't sound as good as, I can't pay you, but I'll share the revenue and we'll split it 50-50, right? Because when you say revenue share, people feel like they're in it with you. When you say commission, then they feel like, but if I don't perform, I don't get paid. So it just helps shift their mindset. Other things you can do is maybe you have certain skills, maybe you can add value to them or their business if they have one. So maybe you're a marketing person, maybe they're a tech person. So maybe you can help them with marketing, they can help you with tech, right? As you go into these relationships, definitely try as soon as you can to formalize it. If you need to bring up equity when you are ready for it, then definitely have a shareholders agreement. Don't just have it on pen and napkin. Employee agreements, stock option plans, just start to think of those as soon as you can. When is the right time to think about equity? I think that equity is best discussed when you actually have some level of revenue or some customers. So if you're at the start, you really don't have anything yet. So if you're just thinking, hey, I want to start something, or I have this idea, it is basically nothing, so there's no point of fighting over it. At the end of the day, it's much better to build up a good company. And even if you are shortchanged a little bit, that's fine. Even if you don't have as much equity, but at least you have something as opposed to trying to fight over nothing. So don't get into those tough conversations and end up breaking up without even actually validating anything. Yes, Ben, you will get the recording slides later. Like I mentioned before, equity should never be used to manage trust. Equity is there as a motivator. It's mostly there to incentivize people to feel like they have ownership, they are interested, they're vested, and they really want to perform. What is normal to know is a lot of people think that if I bring on board a co-founder, I'm going to split 50-50, right? It depends on the type of business that you're building. If you are never going to raise capital, then that's fine. You want to split equity in a way that feels fair for both you and the other person. So no matter what, if you are entering into this conversation and if the other person doesn't feel fair, there is no way for you to wrestle them into the conversation. Even if they agree, even if you negotiate with them and they say, yes, okay, I'm willing to take 10% and you can take 90%, they will not be happy, right? So you want to make sure that they are really treated as equal. The reason why I say the norm is actually 10 to 20% is because typically if you're building a scale-up company, so the type of company that will raise funding, that will eventually get some investors on board, usually you'll have anywhere from, I'd say, 8 to 15% for a co-founder. On the higher end, it's about 20%. So that's normally the range. And you will usually have about 2 to 3 co-founders. The rest of the equity is set aside for the investment pool. And there's some equity that's set aside for ESOP as well. So ESOP is employee stock option plan. So for employee stock option plans, early employees typically get 1 to 2.5%. And this range here, just so you know, 2.5% is more for like if you have an employee that is really a superstar, right? Someone who is an early employee who is really performing really, really well. 1% is it's an okay place to start. So when you think about these percentages, a lot of people, when they're brought on board, it doesn't sound very exciting when you say, hey, I'm giving you 1% of my company. I recommend that you have the conversation around the number of shares it's in. So you might say, hey, I'm giving you 500 shares to start, and then you can get more shares over time or whatever it is. Advisors, same thing. Advisors comes from the ESOP pool. Normally, advisors get anywhere from 0.1% to 2.5%. That's more for technical companies. So if you're a tech startup, then that's what you're looking at. 2.5% for an advisor is usually for those superstar advisors. So if you have like Elon Musk as an advisor, they would get only 2.5%, not a lot, right? So at the end of the day, these are industry norms, and this is recognized. So if you bring on board someone who is not familiar with industry norms, not familiar with joining a startup, my recommendation is to have them sit down with your startup lawyer so that they can really understand like what is the normal range, why are they getting 20%, they're not being shortchanged, you are also getting, you know, a similar range as they are. So have them sit down with your startup lawyer and just really go through some of the basics around what is industry average, what is normal, so that they understand that you're not doing this to try to wrestle them into some sort of disadvantageous position. Like I mentioned, try to be fair. There's no easy way to split equity. If you know that everyone is trying to be fair, and at the end of the day, there's no easy way to split it, because like I mentioned, let's say if you bring on board a tech person and you give them say 20%, they build the tech, and maybe 2 years later you realize that that tech person doesn't need to do any more work. You do all the work, you go out, you raise capital, you go out, you find customers, then you will feel like, you know what, I should have negotiated more equity. That person should have gotten less equity. There's no way of predicting these kind of things. Sometimes maybe the tech person needs to be involved, right? Maybe the tech person feels that, oh, our product has evolved so much, it's changed so much, and you are not really pulling your weight in terms of sales or, you know, finding investors. Then again, it's really hard to predict these kind of things in the future. So I'd say there's no perfect way to be absolutely fair, but you just want to know that everyone is going into it with the right intention. And if everyone feels that, then at least it won't be in a situation where they take it personally, right? So if you just need a rough idea of how to calculate, you can use some of these links. I'll send the slides to you. There's an equity calculator. You can put in things like, you know, how much time you've worked, who's the CEO, who did the coding, you know, who is part-time, who's full-time, who has left, that kind of stuff. And it'll just give you a rough number. It's just mostly an estimation around industry norm. There is another popular method called slicing pie out there. For those of you who are not familiar with slicing pie, basically how it works is as you bring on board co-founders, you and your co-founder will gain equity over time based on your performance. So based on the number of hours that you log, based on the number of customers that you bring on board. Personally, I find that slicing pie is okay to start with, but you usually want to transition to slicing pie really quickly. The reason why I say that is because if you use slicing pie and you start to raise capital from investors, they will think that your company is too complicated because there are certain things that slicing pie doesn't do really well. Slicing pie, sometimes it's hard to determine fair value of time invested. So for example, you could say like, oh, I spent 5 hours doing sales. Like 5 hours doing sales could be unproductive 5 hours, or it could be super productive. You could have closed, you know, 5 customers that would have brought you a few $1,000s in revenue, but you don't know some of these things because maybe your sales cycle is long, right? So it's hard to determine fair value in some cases. It might also incentivize inefficiency, where you have people just doing stuff and logging hours rather than actually solving problems. And the situation where you constantly have to visit and audit and report, it can actually be distracting for the business because you're always having that conversation around equity. Someone might feel like, hey, you know what, I should get more equity. So it brings up some unnecessary friction. You know, you can start just to use it just to get people motivated at the start. But then after some time, I recommend that you move quickly to the traditional method of allocating equity. I haven't talked much about traditional. How the traditional works is usually, I mentioned 8 to 12% for pre-seed. Usually you'll have what we call a 4-year vest and a 1-year cliff. So what that looks like is in the first year, if you have to fire someone or if they quit, they get nothing. So that's what they call the 1-year cliff. It motivates people to at least stay for a year. And the 4-year vest, how that works is basically, let's say you have, you split it this way, you have someone has 20% of equity. If it's vested over 4 years, what happens is your company has the right to buy back those shares until they are fully vested. So over 4 years, that means every year, 5% of the equity will vest, right? So in the first year, they lock down 5%, they own that 5%. You can still buy back 15% if you don't think they're fit and you want to kick them out, right? And then after 2 years, they own 10%, you can buy back another 10%. After 3 years, they own 15%, you can buy back 5%. So that's what the vesting period means. And then after 4 years, they fully own the 20%. So at the start, they're entitled to the full 20%, but they don't actually own it yet. So it's vested over 4 years. So that's what it means. So my recommendation is when you start off, when you are worried about equity, don't worry about equity at the start. So start with just focusing and getting the whole team to really understand that, hey, we are working on this together. We trust each other. We just want to go out there and validate some of those assumptions. We want to figure out who our customers, can we actually build it? Is there demand? Can we get revenue? Once some of those certainties are resolved, then you can start to bring up the equity conversation. Make sure that people understand the difference between options and shares as well. And this applies in any country. Shares, if you give someone shares, they immediately get the shares at the value that the shares are at. That means you are paying them with shares. Make sense? The reason why this is important is because if you're giving them shares, that can actually count towards their income. So when you're doing taxes, if they are, trying to look at, how much they brought in a year, it could bump them up in a tax bracket as well. Options is an alternative. When you give people options, basically you're saying you have the options of buying these shares at the current price today at a future date. That means you might say right now you can buy, you have the options of, let's say you have 500 shares as an option, and you can buy them at 1 cent a share. And then let's say 20 years later, your company, each share is worth $200. That means they can still buy all those shares at 1 cent, and then they can turn around and sell it to whoever wants to buy it at $500 per share. So that's what option means. When they exercise those options, then only then does it actually trigger a tax event. So then in those cases, it might work out better for some people. It really depends on what their situation is. So just be mindful about that so that they know. Because I've seen some companies where they offer co-founders options, and then when the co-founders try to exercise those options and actually convert it into shares, they actually wonder, why do I actually have to pay to get my shares? Like, I'm a co-founder, shouldn't I have shares? Why am I being asked to pay for my shares? It's because you will not offer shares at the start, you are offered options, right? Normally co-founders as well, it's easier to offer shares at the start because your shares are usually worth like close to zero. So you can offer more. At the future, when there's money, if you have to offer options, then people have to buy those shares or buy those options. And sometimes you feel like, if you're bringing on board a co-founder when you already have, let's say your shares are worth $5 per share, then they might say, oh, if you're giving me $500, why do I have to pay you? Sorry, if you're giving me 500 shares and they're $5 per share, why do I have to pay $2,500 to join your company? Then it sounds kind of weird, right? Like you're hiring someone as a co-founder, but they have to pay you to be a part of your company. So sometimes it's easier to have that conversation early on when your shares are not worth that much. Any questions on this? Cool. I try my best to be as clear as possible, but I know I'm going quite quickly. Other things to be mindful is shares are only really valuable for tech companies. And I'll say that bluntly because a lot of companies are not suitable for incentivizing co-founders with shares. The reason why is because the only way someone will get their money back or get their shares worth is if your company gets acquired, if someone else buys your company, or if you go public. If you never sell your company or if you never go public, those shares are worth nothing to them. Because who cares? Like if they have shares, no one's going to buy the shares unless you want to buy them out, right? So if you're thinking about building a tech company, then do know that usually it takes about 7 to 10 years to get to that event where you get acquired or you go public. So if it's going to take you 7 to 10 years, they need to know that as well, because they won't see any value out of the shares until a bit later, right? Other things to know, if someone is starting a few months ahead, so if you're, let's say you're the idea person, like Sejong mentioned, he built a platform, it doesn't justify that he gets a lot more shares. It doesn't justify that he has like 20% more shares than other co-founders. So just look at what is industry norm. Like I mentioned before, typically it's about anywhere from 8 to 12% per founder. So it's not a big advantage just because you started at the start. Because sometimes those people that you bring on board can add a lot more value down the road as well. Focus more on execution. Don't worry too much about the idea as well. So again, that's why the person who comes up with the idea isn't necessarily entitled to more shares. Yeah. So as you raise capital, as you start to bring on board investors, make sure everyone understands that your shares will be like diluted. You won't own as much of the company. You know, over time, every round that you raise, you typically dilute by about 15 to 25% of the company. So people need to know that as well, because they sometimes might realize that, oh, 5 years later, after raising 2 rounds of capital, I only own like 5% of the company. And they might feel like, it isn't fair. Is this person who asked me to join his team trying to push me out of the company? You want to make sure that they just understand so that they don't have the wrong expectation there. Ooh, let's touch on a few more things and then we can wrap up. Management, some high level things, be honest and authentic. I find that the more you share with people, the more they can help you. Another great thing when you think about delegation is some people try to, they understand that micromanaging is bad, but they give people tasks with too many instructions. A good analogy is like, if you're delegating something, it's like giving away Legos, like your toy Legos, right? If you give away with complete instructions on exactly how to build it, it's no fun. People don't like it. People want to be able to problem solve and come up with their own way of solving a problem. Neither do you want to give them a task to do without any instruction and have them figure it out on themselves. You need to give them some level of, some context so they understand what can be done, how to do certain things, and then they can figure out the rest. You also want to make sure that you are not just leaving things around, hoping that people will pick it up. So make sure you're clear that, hey, I want you to do this, or I need you to help me with this, so that people understand what they can do or what they can't do. Don't give things away and expect to take them back. So if you delegate something, you hire someone and you say, hey, I want you to help with tech. And then 2 years later say, you know what? I'm not comfortable with you doing tech. I want to do tech myself. It's going to be really hard to pull that back. So just make sure that you don't end up in those involuntary micromanagement situations. Over communication, you probably hear that a lot. A lot of startups, when I first joined startups as well, I didn't quite understand why a lot of advisors give me the advice that when you have a team, you can never communicate too often. The reason why is because communication, the more you communicate, even though it sounds kind of boring sometimes, like why am I sharing everything? This really helps build that culture with your team and helps people follow along with your journey, especially if you bring on board people at a later time as well. So make sure you're constantly giving feedback. One of the things that I love to do is when I work with people, instead of me having performance meetings with them and telling them what they need to improve, I actually bring my team together and I ask for feedback on how I can improve. That creates a culture where it's okay for people to actually criticize each other and give the kind of constructive feedback. And then they will also want to have those meetings and they can get their own feedback as well. They'll be more receptive to it as well. Make sure that you're setting clear expectations around goals, what you're hoping for them to get. Make sure you're helping them, because at the start they might not be as good as you are, but at the end of the day, like building a team is one of the greatest assets because it really helps you multiply your time. A lot of people feel like right now I can't build a team because it's going to take me too much time to train a new employee. That's because you're not considering the significance equation. In the long run, whoever you are hiring, even if they're not as good as you are right now, they will eventually become as good, or if not better than you are. So if you think long-term, they will add a lot more value to you. So it's okay to bring them on board as long as you're willing to train them. These are just things to know for motivation. Normally, if someone is thinking, should I stay with your company or should I quit? These are the 4 main things that usually go through their head. Number 1, is the company still aligned on your cause and the same cause that I joined for? Is the purpose, is the mission, is the vision still the same? This usually is the biggest issue when teams get acquired. So you normally see like when a company gets bought out by another company, the purpose or mission changes, and then a lot of people get laid off or they quit the company, right? Culture, is the workplace culture a fit for me? Career path, do I see myself progressing? Am I being promoted? And then compensation. Normally what will happen is among these 4 things, number 1 is very important, cause and purpose. For the rest, 2, 3, and 4, what I say is if you have 2 out of the 3, normally they will stay with you. So if you have great culture, good career path, even if you can't compensate them really well, they're willing to stay with you. Or if you have, let's say, good career path and great compensation, but terrible culture, people will still be willing to stay with you. So just look at these things and just make sure that how am I designing this around my HR? So there's a lot of stuff I covered today. My key takeaway is don't look for a co-founder, look for team members. Don't try to rush into a relationship, right? A real co-founder is someone who really respects you, is willing to call you up on your bullshit, and is really invaluable to your company. That is someone who is really worth promoting to become a co-founder. Focus on values and culture fit over skills. Skills, yes, important, but not number one, because I believe, especially with startups, most people can pick up the skills over time. And as you grow and evolve your company, these people need to evolve with you as well. So what they started out on day one might not be what they are actually doing, let's say in month 6 or first year. If you're thinking about diversity, focus on cognitive diversity rather than looking at superficial diversity. As you're interviewing and screening people, use the STAR framework. So situation, task, action, and result. And be creative with compensation. You can mix and match different things, right? It could be, I can pay you, let's say, only $10 per hour, but I will also give you X amount of equity, and I'll also give you, let's say we do a revenue share 20-80. So you can mix things up as well. Your goal there is when you're having a conversation around compensation, don't do it alone. Like involve them in conversation, get them to actually voice what they want. So your goal there is to treat them the way that they want to be treated, not what you think is good for them. Because you might think that this is a great package for them, but they might not actually like it. So try to get them involved, try to have them have a say in what they are looking for. If all else fails, start to sell. This is a great way to start, because once you can actually show that your idea is not just an idea and that there is demand for it, even if you haven't actually built anything, you can use that traction to actually attract team members, especially tech people, because developers are high in demand and they can usually get paid for working for any other big company out there. They are less likely to jump ship and move to a startup nowadays, especially if it's at the early stage. So if you can actually show them that your startup is not just a fluffy idea, that you actually have customers that are willing to pay, they're more likely to join you. There's this great example, an article where there's this company, I think it's called Compass. They started by actually piecing together an MVP, doing things manually, and they were just selling their services without actually having a tech person. And that's how actually they got some customers on board, they actually got some revenue, and they used all of those numbers to bring on board a tech person, because the tech person was more interested in their business after hearing that, hey, you know what, it's not just an idea. Cool, that's it. Some upcoming events. If you're interested, there's that hackathon coming up this weekend. Most of my other workshops for the rest of the month are sales focused. So there's one on sales copy, there's one on revenue growth and optimization, and there's one on goal setting for sales team coming up. Full details on my Eventbrite and the hackathon I mentioned. And otherwise, here's my contact. Any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I don't run my webinars with anything to sell, so there's nothing for you to buy today. So if you really enjoyed the experience and you found that you walked away with something of value, feel free to donate to me. You can do a PayPal or e-transfer to my email. Or if you have any questions, just feel free to send me a message. If you think you need some more advice, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to help. Yeah. That's it. Any other questions? I'll hang around for a bit.
Can I just say that this was really, really good? Sorry, it's raining outside really, really hard. And probably hear it. This is really, really good. And I think it was a lot of material, but very good material. And I can say that I learned some of these lessons the hard way. So I wish you had taught this 4 years ago.
Thank you, Ritesh. I personally find, like, if anything, I don't think I did a really good job with this webinar. Too much content. But I think it's important content as well. So I find it's okay if I kind of speed through things.
It's all very useful stuff. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, if anyone needs the slides or recording, just shoot me an email. I'll post my email in the chat as well if anyone needs it. Some people have been wondering, like, Chin, why don't you just send all people who register for the events, the slides and recording directly? I deliberately don't do it that way because I want to see who's engaging, who's actually attending and watching my content. So if you want the content, just shoot me an email, I'll send it to you. Cool. If no other questions, you are free to leave whenever you want to. I will hang around for the next 5 minutes.
You know, it's very funny you said about the equity conversation.
Yeah.
And not having that too soon. So in my last startup, the person who had the most early and long conversation about equity was the first to leave.
No surprise.
And the people who stuck around, you know, said we'll figure it out once we have a product, they stuck around the longest in the whole adventure.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see people's motivations. And
Yeah.
some people want to do it for the actual idea and the company and the product, and some just want the equity in a startup.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of just going it purely for the opportunity. They're just in it for like, I want to make money, I want to scale.
I have one experience about that. If somebody want high upfront equity without the vesting, then that person is pretty much wanting the equity more than the passion. Right?
Yeah, that's definitely a red flag for me.
Yeah. I have one question. I mean, not about this, but you know, in terms of pitch competitions, like you said, pitch competition is a good way to find the co-founders. So how do you find, even like Eventbrite is the only source I know. Other than that, is there any good source to find the pitch places?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Eventbrite, one, you can try meetups as well, although meetups, depending on region, some of the meetups are not very effective anymore. Other great ones would be usually a lot of startup incubator and accelerators have pitch events. So look at your local incubators and accelerators in your region. Are you in Vancouver or somewhere else?
No, I'm in the DC, Washington, DC.
I'm not too sure which organizations are in DC. So start with incubators, accelerators. You can check out angel investor groups. Usually a lot of angel investment groups have their own events. Stay away from VC events. So venture capital events, especially if you're a startup, you're way too early for them anyways. Yeah, I would look for community events. So Startup Digest is a good place. Techstars, they run Startup Digest. They usually have a lot of events. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Oh, one more question about the fundraising. In order to fundraise, I heard there are some professional fundraisers. What do you think about that? Hiring them, like some commission, or I don't know how to find them, but that's what I heard.
Professional fundraisers, so I'll say they work for Series A+. They will never work for seed. The reason why is because if you're raising your first round of funding, an investor wants to invest in you, not the business. So they want to see the founder pitching, because usually they feel that if you have someone else pitch on your behalf, they don't really get to know you, and then they don't trust you. And at the end of the day, like if you're so early stage, like I mentioned, it's not about the idea or the market. They care more about the founders, because they want to know, like, can I trust you with my money? Are you coachable? Are you able to, be flexible? Are you able to take feedback? Are you able to adjust your product depending on what your customers are saying? So you have to do it. If you are starting your first round of funding, you can start to use them for Series A, B, C, D, and future. But yeah.
Thank you.
Chin, any points on where to find salespeople / well, not sales, business development? Like, I think sales is such a big part of it. It'd be very good to have a sales co-founder, purely someone who is on that side.
Good question.
Thoughts on that?
As someone who is in sales myself, I actually don't like to hire people who have sales experience. And the reason why I say that is because people who have sales experience, in my opinion, tend to have been trained in very rigid ways of sales. They tend to have very, like, I have to do it this way. It's more manipulative. They don't have the right kind of mindset. So I tend to prefer to hire people who are really passionate and excited about the product and are extroverts, people who are willing to go put themselves out there and are keen to learn about sales. Then you can coach and train them, or you can put them through training programs. And usually they tend to perform better than the ones who are just purely salespeople or maybe not as excited about your product. For a co-founder, I find usually the best type of co-founder that has a sales related role is someone who is more strategic. So when I say strategic, it's not just like they're good at technical sales, but they are good at experimentation. They're good at testing different things. They are able to be more visionary. They can think about like, how can we adjust the pricing of the product? How can we adjust the offerings that we have? How can we go after different target customers? So they have more of that revenue lens, and they are not just like purely selling. Yeah.
Thank you. That was very good. Okay.
I have one more question about one of your comments during the session. You said, hire slowly, but fire quickly.
Yep.
I mean, I totally agree with that. But only one problem is that, when you fire, somebody doesn't agree on the signing the settlement, then what do you do?
Yeah. So firing, there's a lot of reasons you can fire someone. So of course, if it's within probational period, you can fire them without any cause. If they pass that period, then you have to have just cause. Just cause can be two fronts. One is performance based, and then the other one is more the more intangible one. So performance based is this is the one where if they're not hitting targets, if you set up specific goals for them, if they're not meeting their sales target, their development goals, then that's very black and white. It's quite easy to fire for that. The hardest one is usually where they are causing other trouble. So I'll give you one example. When I worked for this company called Freedom Mobile, it's a telecom company here in Canada, we had this salesperson. He was actually the top performing salesperson in the country, but everybody hated working with him. He would steal sales. He would manipulate customers. He would offer like products that were like kind of like in the gray area, like not quite legal, but also kind of legal. So he would, like, we had a promotion where we would give away a tablet for any customer that was activating a phone plan. So you tell people like, yeah, activate the phone plan, you get a free tablet. And then he would tell them to cancel the phone plan after that and keep the tablet, right? So he would like read between the lines for everything and try to do these kind of things just to get sales numbers. So nobody enjoyed working with him, and I knew he had to go. So I actually deliberately asked for one of the other stores to transfer him to my store because I knew that I could fire him, and they weren't willing to fire him. So I actually brought him onto my store, and I was able to document the process really well with him. So for these kind of things, because it's not performance-based, you need to make sure that you document in writing all of those kind of coaching conversations that you have with them. So let's say if you have a situation where someone brings up and says like, oh, you were stealing my sales, then you can log that as a conversation. You can say, hey, we need to have you adjust some of these behaviors. Here's what we recommend, or come up with an action plan. So they have what we call performance improvement plans, PIP. And then you actually document all of these, and then you can have warnings. So typically, I don't know in US, but in Canada, there's usually 3 written warnings before you can fire someone. So you just have to make sure you document all of it. You have to have those written warnings, you have those conversations in person, and then you send an email to confirm that you had the conversation and that they need to change this behavior by this time. And then after that, if it's still not happening, then you have just cause to fire them. So if you do it that way, then usually you won't get into challenge with the settlement thing because they're fired, right? And it's not being laid off. So you should be able to cover your bases in most of the cases. Yeah.
Thank you.
Probably best to speak to a lawyer about that. I'm not a legal expert.
Yeah.
Great. If no other questions, we can wrap it up. It's 7:35.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. No problem. Have a good night.
Good night.
See you, everyone.